Was not the state of matters similar in many respects at the Revolution in Scotland, and may not a crisis of the same kind yet recur? Was there any rational ground to think, at the period of the Westminster Assembly, that such a synod would have met, or, supposing it somehow to have been collected, that it could have continued together until it had finished its business, if it had not been convoked, maintained, and protected by the Parliament of England? Do many of those who deny the power in question reflect that they owe those books which they still, in one degree or another, own as subordinate standards of their ecclesiastical communion, to a synod which was thus convoked? Do they reflect that by means of them the interests of religion have been promoted to an incalculable degree? Unity and peace preserved in the Church, etc., from the period of their compilation down to the present day, in Scotland, in England, in Ireland, and in America? Or, recollecting these things, are they prepared to take the pen and insert their absolute veto? The civil magistrate, for the better effecting thereof, hath not power to call synods? At the same time it may be observed here, as on the former objection, that it is not asserted that the magistrate may exercise this power on all occasions and in all circumstances, or whenever there are any evils of a religious kind to correct. It is sufficient that there may be times and circumstances in which he may warrantably exert his power. It is true that the confession, in another place, chapter 31, section 2, is not sufficiently full and explicit in declaring the intrinsic right of the Church to convoke synods. But this defect was supplied by the Act of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland, receiving and approving of the confession. And here a footnote. See Act of Assembly, prefixed in all our copies of the Confession of Faith. Agreeable to this Act was the confession ratified by the Parliament of Scotland. And in the formula used in the secession from the beginning, an approbation of the confession is required as received by that Act of Assembly. After stating that the magistrate has power to call synods, it is added to be present at them, and to provide that whatsoever is transacted in them be according to the mind of God. Not to insist here that these words ought in fair construction to be understood of such synods as have been convoked by the magistrate, what reasonable objection can be made to this being being present? May he not claim a right to be present at any public meeting within his dominions? May he not be present in a synod to witness their proceedings, to preserve their external peace, to redress their grievances, or, why not, to receive their advice or admonitions? But if it be supposed that his presence is necessary to give validity to their proceedings, and that he sits as presses of their meetings, or as director of their deliberations and votes, I shall only say that the words of the confession give not the slightest countenance to such claims, which are utterly inconsistent with the common principles of Presbyterians, and in particular with the well-known and avowed principles of the Church of Scotland. A similar answer may be given to the objection against the last clause of the paragraph. May not any Christian, whatever his station be, provide that whatsoever is transacted, even in synods, be according to the mind of God? If the legislature or government of a nation have a special care about religion, or if there is any particular duty at all which they have to discharge respecting it, and particularly if they have power in any case to call synods, must it not in a special manner be incumbent on them to see to this? Nor does this imply that they are in possession of any ecclesiastical powers, or that they pass a public judgment on true and false religion. Their private judgment is sufficient to regulate them in their public managements, in this as well as on many other subjects, about which they exercise their authority, without sustaining themselves as the proper judges of them, as in the case of many arts, sciences, etc., which they patronize and encourage. Must not Christian rulers, judges, and magistrates provide that whatsoever is transacted by themselves be according to the mind of God? Is it not highly fit that they should be satisfied, and that they should by every proper means provide that the determinations of synods be according to the mind of God, if they are afterwards to legalize them, or if they are to use their authority for removing all external obstructions out of the way of their being carried into effect, both of which they may do without imposing them on the consciences of their subjects? And, in fine, are there not various ways in which they may provide, as here stated, without assuming a power foreign to their office, or intruding on the proper business of synods or ecclesiastical courts? But if it be supposed that the magistrate, as the proper judge in such matters, is to control the deliberations of the ecclesiastical assembly, to prescribe and dictate to them what their decisions shall be, or that, when they have deliberated and decided, he may receive appeals from their decisions, or may bring the whole before his tribunal, and review, alter, and reverse their sentences, I have only to say, as formerly, that the words of the confession give not the slightest countenance to such claims, which are utterly inconsistent with the common principles of Presbyterians, and in particular with the well-known and avowed principles and contendings of the Church of Scotland. But though I consider these objections as destitute of a solid foundation, yet, as the construction on which they proceed has often been put on the passages to which they refer, I, for my part, can see no good reason why an explanation should not be given of these passages, or of the doctrine contained in them, with the view of preventing all misconception of the sentiments of those who approve of the confession, provided the two following things are attended to. In the first place, that this declaration do not fix on the confession the obnoxious sentiments which are disclaimed, and in the second place, that it do not, under the cover of general and ambiguous expressions, invalidate or set aside the general doctrine respecting the exercise of civil authority about religion, which is recognized in the Westminster Confession, and in all those of all Protestant churches. Explanations of this kind were given in the early papers of the secession, which are sufficient to show that they entertained no principles favorable to persecution or injurious to the liberties and independence of the Church, and that they did not view the confession as containing such principles. And here a footnote. Act and Testimony, Display 1, 156 to 159, and Answers to Narn, pages 311 through 314. That magistrates are not exempted from all concern about religion in their public and official capacity, and that civil authority ought to be employed and is capable in different ways of being employed for the advancement of religion, and in Christian countries for the good of the Church, is a doctrine which, in my opinion, is not only true, but of great practical importance. I shall state, as briefly as I can, the grounds on which I consider this doctrine as resting, and the leading explications and qualifications with which it has been received among Presbyterians, and particularly in the secession. The general doctrine seems equally consonant to the dictates of sound reason, the maxims of good policy, and the uniform tenor and express declarations of Scripture. The obligations and the practice of religion, in some degree, must be supposed to exist antecedently to the erection of social institutions among mankind. It enters into all the duties and offices of life, and none are at liberty to overlook or be indifferent about its interests in any relation in which they stand, or in reference to any connection which they may form. It is the firmest bond of social union, the most efficient check on power, the strongest security for obedience, the principal source of justice, fidelity, humanity, and all the virtues. In framing their laws, all nations, ancient and modern, have availed themselves of its sanctions and made provision in one way or another for that worship which they practiced. And the principle on which they acted was expressly recognized and applied to the true religion in the only system of national polity that ever was prescribed immediately by heaven. It would be strange if a people professing Christianity should give the first example of a nation settling its fundamental laws and regulating the administration of its government without acknowledging the God that is above, making any provision for the maintenance of his honor, or requiring any religious qualifications whatever in those who were to rule over it. It would be stranger still if it should be argued that Christianity itself requires this, and that it forbids any homage being done to its founder by national laws, or any service being performed to him by their administrators.